What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Halving Report podcast. I am your host, Brad Bynes. The price of Bitcoin is approximately $30.5 thousand US, and there's only about 40 weeks left until the next Bitcoin halving. Today, we welcome Dr. Julian Hosp onto the show. Julian spent 10 years as a pro kite surfer, 7 years in medicine. Now, Julian is a serial entrepreneur, the CEO of Cake Group and Bake.io. His large online audience speaks volumes. We're super lucky to have him here on the show today. Everybody, welcome Julian to the show. Welcome to the Halving Report, Julian. Thanks for doing this today. It's a pleasure to meet you. This is our 88th episode of the Halving Report. Just like your bake story, we started in 2019, so I feel like there's a kindred spirit there. Again, we're honored to have you on. Your substantial following online speaks volumes. We genuinely appreciate your dedication and free education that you offer in this crypto space. One captivating theme that I saw throughout your online presence is this idea of being CryptoFit. So my first question for you, Julian, is what is the origin of this idea of being CryptoFit, and what does it mean?
Man, I got into this space actually 9 years ago, 2014, and I was a medical doctor at that point. I come from professional sports, so being fit was everything that was, I think, in life always being healthy and fit. And I learned about blockchain and cryptocurrencies, and so I just thought, I definitely didn't understand that part back then at all. So I thought, hey, if I can figure this out, then I really want to be on this mission on inspiring other people to learn this. And so I just called this CryptoFit. Understanding this world of decentralization and so on.
Given your large audience online, I'm kind of surprised I haven't been following you for a longer time in this space. Where's your largest audience? You make mostly German content?
German, So I do most of my content is in German. I do English as well, and I have quite a large following here in Singapore, but where I live. But I'm not so US or America centric. So I think that's also obviously Americans love to follow Americans, or North America loves to follow North America. I understand that.
Definitely, man. Do you notice any big differences in the crypto communities from nation to nation?
Oh, for sure. I think, for example, Singapore, because Vitalik was here for so long with the Ethereum Foundation, so Singapore is very, very, very Ethereum focused. I think that is something that's very specific to Singapore, very special, I always feel. And then in Europe, Germany is extremely Bitcoin focused. There's a very strong trend there with Bitcoin. I mean, Lightning Network, Lightning Labs, a lot of them, they do a lot of work from there. So I noticed that as well. So I think these are very specific, regional focuses. And then I think in general, if you look at the Asian culture, a lot of the Asian culture has a bit of a gambling culture in it. They love to gamble. So many times you notice that in Asia, some of those things really work that don't work anywhere else when it comes to gambling. And then vice versa, then you have those things that are extremely solid, and then sometimes you cannot attract someone here to be interested in that, because for them, they're like, but I saw this new thing out of Macau, and I can make 200% a week, and I want to rather have that thing from Macau because I can make 200% a week. And so it's just different cultures. Obviously, I'm totally generalizing here, but that's just something I've noticed.
Yeah, no, I was just interested because, like you said, Americans really like to follow Americans and are very much intertwined with the North American culture. What can you give us an introduction into Bake.io?
Yeah. So actually, it's an entire group. The group is called Cake, and that's what we started a bit over 4 years ago. It started as only retail. The retail arm used to be called Cake because that was all there was. But that group really kind of grew. And the mission of the group is to advance blockchain technologies forward for enterprises, individuals, builders, and investors alike. So it's really this focus on driving blockchain forward. Initially, it was retail. That was the main focus. Then afterwards, the enterprise arm came, which is called Levain. We do a lot of custody solutions there. And then afterwards, we had an R&D arm, which is called Birthday Research, and it's really, really focused on, we actually contribute open source to Ethereum, to Bitcoin, to the DeFi chain ecosystem. A lot of ecosystems where we just contribute and drive kind of growth there. And we have a venture arm. Everything is around this cakey name. The venture arm is called Whisk. And so, it's a lot about this. For us, it was all about having some fun to it. Finance can be so boring and so dry. And so we renamed the retail arm Bake, And the idea originally was to get cash flow in your crypto. This has changed a bit over the years, where cash flow was super interesting in 2019, 2020. And then became less and less relevant. So now it's really about dollar cost averaging into your favorite coins. This can be Bitcoin or Ethereum. I mean, we have most of the large coins. And then if you want, get cash flow on top. But it's really about building a diversified crypto portfolio. And one thing we've been really looking into at Bake now is adding real world assets. So adding tokenized bonds, adding actual commodities, adding precious metals, just so that you can really kind of get this diversified exposure. The one thing that we don't touch are securities, because that's like an entire kind of difficult pathway. Now, obviously, I want to be very clear on this. It depends on the jurisdiction. In some jurisdictions, we don't offer certain things because our legal advice there is we shouldn't be offering those in those jurisdictions. And it just depends. Some countries are a bit more liberal on these rules than other countries, as we definitely know from the US and so on.
Now, from what I've seen, Singapore is quite crypto friendly in regards to regulation. What are some major differences there that attracts companies in the crypto Bitcoin space to start up in Singapore?
I would say yes and no. So I think where it's very strict in comparison to most other jurisdictions is when it comes to money laundering regulations, KYC. So we need to, like in most jurisdictions, for example, in Europe, if you, everything to I think $1,000 in Europe, the KYC requirements are pretty lenient. So you can go and say, okay, all I need is a local ID. And if I have a local ID, you can purchase $1,000 a month, for example, in cryptocurrency. In Singapore, from the very first dollar, we have to do pretty much every check there is. What's your address? We need to get all the details, passport, and so on. So Singapore is extremely strict when it comes to that. Now, where Singapore is way more liberal is this concept of what is a security and what is not a security. I think if you look at this from a US perspective, this is where the US tends to be incredibly focused on. Many times I feel the US is not so focused on the money laundering regulations, and it's just so focused on, is this a security or not? And it's just a bit of a different kind of point. And then if you look into Europe, Europe is all about data protection, right? So it's all about, if a customer comes to you, can this customer be sure that their data is not being abused, not misused, not spread somewhere else? What happens if that customer wants to delete their data? It's always tricky, because obviously you have some financial stuff. You need to keep financial documentation for customers, especially in the EU. And then they come to you and say, oh, but I would love to delete my account. I want you to erase all my data. And we're like, okay, look, we're happy to do that, but by law, we need to store data in case, I don't know, law enforcement comes, or in case the local IRS comes and so on, we need to store that. So I think it's very regional what the various kind of regulator looks for. And Singapore right now is getting actually relatively strict when it comes to what can you offer to retail. Like they want to actually not allow staking from October on for locals. So that staking can only be done by themselves. It seems that, yeah, they're just really worried about all these schemes that have been going on and have been faking customers.
How long have you been in Singapore for?
2016, so 7 years. Yeah, it's
okay.
I mean, when people ask me, is it like the perfect place to live? I think there's no perfect place. I think it always depends on what you want. What I love about Singapore is Singapore has this heritage with Lee Kuan Yew, who was this very strong leader who built this island, and it's really an island. It's basically a swamp if you actually look at it. Built this swamp of an island into one of the richest places in the world. It's the only place at the equator that doesn't have natural resources and is a first world country. There's no other place like this other than the United Emirates, and they're full with oil. Singapore has none of that. And I always believe success leaves clues, and I just always love to learn from here. Singapore is very, very open when it comes to attracting the right talent. Their border it's so interesting to kind of see these global discussions right now about open borders, closed borders. Singapore has a very closed border, but they have a very open border for people that they need. They are very open to entrepreneurs, very open to highly skilled people. But it can also be that they say, look, we need nurses, for example. Let's have a lot of nurses come in. And so it's very interesting how they kind of approach that. They're very interested. I think it's very interesting how they attract capital, how they attract businesses, how their taxation system is. So I think that's a very beautiful kind of approach. And so I have 3 young kids, young family. Our business has 200 employees. For me, it's just the perfect place to be when it comes to all those things that I'm interested in. And maybe someone else my mother, for example, she loves to go in the mountains. She loves to ski, and I'm originally from Austria, Europe, and I think she would be miserable here in Singapore, where it's 30 degrees every day, like 100 degrees Fahrenheit every day, and she would need snow and mountains, and obviously there's a very different kind of lifestyle. So I think it really depends, and for us, it's absolutely perfect here.
How does it work with your diverse lifestyle? Because you're quite the active guy. From what I read myself, you played basketball growing up. You did professional surfing. How does it work for your outside life of work and Bitcoin?
Yeah, man, I'm getting old, so I don't know. It's not so much surfing anymore. I play golf. I go running. I go cycling or something. So yeah, and then obviously with the kids. I mean, kids are very young little, older one is getting 3 years old. So I mean, life completely changes. Focus changes. Let's see. I mean, I don't know. Maybe in 5 years, when the kids get a bit older, where you can actually do stuff with them, maybe I'm gonna look into spending a bit more time in, I don't know, yeah, in the wilder kind of regions. I always think what I love so much about Singapore is how perfect everything is here, how clean it is, how safe it is. I mean, there's you really get kind of blinded in how perfect that city is. But at the end, it doesn't really kind of resemble real life outside of this city, because, I don't know, you just lose a bit of a self-awareness. When I go to a restaurant, I tend to reserve my table with my phone. So I put my phone there, and then I go to the counter and order, and I don't even look back. And I mean, this wouldn't work in most places in the world. It's just, so at some point, my kids definitely have to get a bit of, I don't know, some real life experience.
yeah, learn those street skills over here in America.
Yes.
Yeah, I think when I was there, it was something like 100 and some odd days without any reported crime. I just thought that was absolutely absurd, because the population is not small in Singapore. Like it's huge. It's a huge place. Seems very, very progressive there in many ways. Julian,
it's a good base, and for me, it's a good base. I mean, I think, why am I here? I'm here because I wanted to be in Asia. I went to high school in the U.S. in Nashville, Tennessee, and just spent a lot of time in North America. And then I grew up in Europe, and so I wanted to come to Asia. Just for me, that was a new kind of horizon. And yeah, I think Singapore is a really perfect place for that. So yeah.
Now, earlier you talked about, allocating and dollar cost averaging using your platform with your favorite crypto assets, but you're also, reaching beyond cryptocurrencies. Do you have a favorite cryptocurrency or strategy yourself? Is there merit to the Bitcoin maximalism narrative?
I don't believe in any kind of maximalism. I just think that it's very unlikely that one thing is the cure for all. I think everything has up and downsides. Everything has a trade-off. I love Bitcoin. I dollar cost average into Bitcoin. I've been a Bitcoin holder for a very, very long time. Bitcoin, to be honest, gave me generational wealth. So I love that asset. I think this asset is going to be life-changing for a lot of people. But I also think there are things that it can't do. I think there are things that, for example, Ethereum can do. And I'm a big Ethereum fan. I love Ethereum just as much. I love the things that it can do. We contribute a lot to the DeFi chain ecosystem, which is a blockchain that started with native DeFi for Bitcoin and is now mainly focused on bridging Ethereum to Bitcoin. It has these very unique properties where on the one hand it has a UTXO model, but an EVM layer on top. So we contribute a lot open source to that. And so, I mean, I love all three chains there. I think they all are really, really good. I think the key always is you need to understand what you invest into, so you're not so much focused on price or affected by price. You shouldn't be affected much on actually what we are talking here, right? So you shouldn't be affected by influencers. You shouldn't be affected by the media. You should see them more as an idea giver, right? So if I talk about something here, let's say I talk about Bitcoin, I talk about Ethereum, I talk about DeFi chain, or I don't know, we can talk about Solana, whatever coin. You should see this more as an idea, but it should never be that point where you then go and say, oh, you know what, I'm going to buy this just because Brad says so, or just because Julian says so. You should never do that. You should always then go and say, okay, let me really understand that investment. Let me really understand the fundamentals of it. And you need to understand utility. Utility is everything. I try to always explain this. And for those that struggle with what utility is, utility means you use something without knowing its price, right? So the example I always love to give is oil. You can go on the stock market and you can buy a barrel of oil and you look at the price and you're always going to focus on price, because the only way you're ever going to do something with this thing again is if you sell it, and you need to have a price for that. Now, when you actually use oil is when you go to the gas station, you get petrol, you put it in your car, and then you drive it, and you don't ever think about the price when you drive it. You don't think, oh, today I'm not going to drive the car because today the petrol is a bit more expensive out on the market. Oh, today I'm going to drive it. No, you only look at the price when you actually buy this thing, and afterwards you use it. And so that would be the ideal, right? And so I understand that you're probably not going to actually use all the things that you will ever buy, because probably you're going to buy a lot of petrol and you're going to drive your car, and you hope that along the road you find people who really want that petrol and you can sell it to them on the road. So that's kind of the example of you buying Bitcoin, you buying ETH, you buying DFI, you buying Solana, whatever your coins are. And that should always be that kind of mentality. I just noticed that a lot of people, especially in the crypto space, they don't approach it this way. They purely buy something. Even if I look at the Bitcoin maxis, right? I think they really focused on some good things. But the stacking sats, the only reason they stack sats is because they hope the price goes to 500,000 or hope the price goes to $1 million. And it's always focused on price, right? So what they would have to focus on, and I would love that, for example, Sailor focuses more on that, is really kind of driving the ecosystem of Bitcoin. Who are the people that actually accept Bitcoin as Bitcoin, not as dollars, and then they convert it into Bitcoin? This, like, you need to build this ecosystem. I'm a big fan, so we invested into an Ordinal project that built on top of Bitcoin. So I love anything that kind of drives utility, and that for me is the key thing. I think that's if people ask me the two crucial kind of things that crypto lacks right now, or blockchain. One, it can all be summarized with utility, but the first one is actually for the average person using the stuff in a decentralized manner, aka private key issues. That's the first really big hurdle. And the second one, you buying those coins, clearly and easily understanding what can you use them for if suddenly there was no more market to sell them on. What would you use them for, right? And if there's no more market, how would you use them? And that would be what would give this industry an explosion. And that's something, that I hope that, I can help as well on the platform. On Bake, for example, we try to really focus heavily on that to make sure people really understand the narrative behind the coins, understand the kind of ideas, how to use them, what to use them for. Of course, we are a centralized platform, but then on the other hand, we always kind of encourage people and say, hey, if you want to get off and control your own private keys, then do so. And I think that's always just a key part.
Yeah, definitely. Something I look for in platforms that whether if they're centralized, are they still helping people learn about self-custody, and how much of the priority they make that. But I want to shift a little bit, Julian. Again, you have such an interesting background. You had a journey in medicine for 7 years. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and your experiences in the medical field and how that shaped your perspective at the intersection of healthcare and technology.
Look, for me, what got me into blockchain in 2014 was actually trying to start a medical startup. And I wanted to go into a field that today is very easy to understand because we had this entire issue with COVID and vaccinations and stuff. But I actually wanted to have a vaccination passport in 2014. At that point, that was not so much controversial. It was more on, this is never going to be possible. And that was what I wanted to actually do in 2014. I didn't know about 6 years later, COVID and stuff coming. I think today everyone would understand what this vaccination passport is, and I think that would just be, understandably, would be a lot of pushback against it. So that was I think that was what got me into that space. It was this controlling your own data, controlling your own kind of digital stuff, whatever this stuff is. And for me, again, I'm very focused on utility. That has always been why, for example, I love Bitcoin and why I criticize Bitcoin, because I loved it because on the one hand it could have so much utility in the future, and I struggled with it so much because it had so little utility right now. That's why, for example, Ethereum at the very beginning, I didn't believe in Ethereum at all, because I felt this was only about ICOs and there was no actual utility to it. And that's then when my love for Ethereum grew a bit bigger, when the entire kind of idea came around DeFi, around NFTs. And I understand a lot of this is still gambling and a lot of this is still speculation. I get all that. But the utility there became very, very strong. And for me, that's always what I focus on. My love for Bitcoin became so much higher this year when I understood ordinals on top of Bitcoin. The AI part around Bitcoin, Arthur Hayes has such an interesting blog post around this that just came out, where he talks about how AI will need a currency, and that currency will very likely not be a fiat currency, and AI will very likely choose Bitcoin. And that to me makes so much sense. I agree with that. And AI doesn't have issues with the user experience of decentralization. So I was always a bit of a critic for the Lightning Network, because I always said, look, for the majority of people, Lightning is not going to be able to be used decentrally. It will always be custodial. It will always have a massive centralization impact. But AIs don't care about this. AIs are really, really good at doing these things. So this is just something where I see massive utility for Bitcoin, and that is something that gets me extremely excited. So I'm sometimes more excited about things that, for example, I'm not a big believer in that the dollar is going to die tomorrow. I think that the dollar is going to have way more years to come than most people want it to have. Yes, the dollar is dying, but I think it's going to die way slower than most people hope so. So yeah, I have sometimes a bit of counter beliefs, but that doesn't mean that I'm actually less bullish than most other people. I'm probably more bullish than other people, but just based on other facts.
Speaking of bullish, we're coming into, 40 weeks or something like that away from the next Bitcoin halving. What are your thoughts around the 2024 halving, and do you see it having a big impact this time around, or what are your thoughts about that in regards to price as well?
So this is my third halving, or it's going to be my third halving. My first one was 2016, and to be honest, I completely missed that halving. It was an okay deal. It was something that obviously people kind of talked about, but it was more, was the second halving? Is everything going to go smoothly? Is the block reward actually going to halve, right? So that was more of it was not so much of a price focus, to be honest. That price, also 2016, people say, oh yeah, the halving had such a big impact, but it's actually not so true. The entire kind of cycle with Bitcoin back then came from the ICOs, and suddenly you had these ICOs come up in 2016 and then 2017 that at the end really caused that massive price spike. So I think that was my 2016 experience. The 2020 experience, very different. Everyone was locked down. Everyone was like, oh, this is going to be the big rally. We had this rally up, and then obviously COVID crash and so on. Everything came down, and then massive money printing. So I personally don't think that the halving actually had any impact on the price in the past two cycles that I had experienced, but it was more of a coincidence rather than anything else. Now, what do I expect for next year? I actually expect it to have a big impact going into the halving, but mainly because of the narrative. Not so much because whether we have 6 point something Bitcoins getting released every 10 minutes or 3 point something Bitcoins getting released every minute makes such a huge difference. It really doesn't. That we already, you could look at the data right now. Already right now, what they call the shrimps. So these are like the regular kind of Bitcoin investors. When you just look at all the dollar cost averaging that they're doing on a regular monthly basis, they're already buying up all the new supply of Bitcoins. So it's already super bullish. So it has very little to do. And actually, it's going to be more impactful if someone comes and dumps a huge load of of coins that they have been hodling for a long time, rather than this little bit of change in inflation. So my expectation in this is, especially when we get to March next year, we're going to see a hype up. But to me, that's going to be more of just a narrative rather than actual fundamentals really, really changing. To me, and here comes the interesting part, could easily be that this coincides with the Bitcoin spot ETF, and then the market's going to rally, and people are like, you see, the Bitcoin halving had this massive impact. And I'm like, yeah, it's going to remind me a bit similar to 2020, where actually all the money printing came in, and people feel like, all this, that the halving had such an impact. I don't know. So that's just what I see. I think it's going to be more of a narrative first, and if the fundamentals afterwards really drive it, then I think this is going to be powerful. I'm bullish. I want to be very clear on this. I'm dollar cost averaging. I'm bullish on Bitcoin. I'm not so sure if that change of issuance from 6 something Bitcoins to 3 point something Bitcoins is going to be the massive driver.
Yeah, no, it's funny you said that about the Bitcoin ETF, because I just saw a tweet earlier today, and how I guess one of the deadlines is like the very last deadline is just like a month before the Bitcoin halving. So what you said makes
stars
a lot of
could
sense
align.
there. Yeah. So we'll see. I'm for the record, I'm also very bullish. I like to focus on the halving for the point of having people to zoom out and learn that Bitcoin's moving in cycles, and everything. There's a lot of things that are transparent in Bitcoin that just don't exist in the legacy financial system. Julian, what are some like of your favorite sources? Like, are you consuming German content? Do you have any favorite influencers in this space?
Good question. I think it's a bit of a mix of everything. Not so much German content. I don't know. I mean, I still think that probably the leading resources are still coming from the US. I do follow some of the Bitcoin maxis. I follow some of the Ethereum maxis. I love Laura Shin's podcast, which is Unchained. I listen to that a lot. She obviously comes from a very journalist kind of view. It's a bit of a mix of a lot of things. And I mean, look, I always think you should take a lot of things with a grain of salt. You should always understand that obviously a Bitcoin maxi will always shill Bitcoin, Ethereum maxi will always shill Ethereum. It's sure. I mean, and just kind of, I'm trying to get some ideas. And at the end, I think it is very spotty on things. So yeah, sometimes I focus on this data point or that data point. I'm always a bit hesitant when suddenly I see too many people kind of having the same narrative or kind of the same kind of excitement. That always kind of rattles me up a bit. I'm like, okay, maybe it's just people like, I don't know, talking their own book or, yeah, I don't know, not really substantiated discussion points. But it's a mix all over.
What would you say the biggest misconception is about that new people in this space have about Bitcoin or cryptocurrency?
First of all, and look, I get where this is coming from, but this idea of you should always go into self-custody right away, I think that is a very tricky point, because for most people, this is the hardest point about it all. The hardest point about it all is because suddenly people all feel like, if I don't do this, I don't do this right. And this is, in my opinion, not a good thing. I think the first key thing that we need to teach beginners is buy your crypto on a reputable platform. Go somewhere that's regulated, right? I mean, I think North America has great platforms. Here in Singapore, everything here is very, very strict. A lot of the European platforms are very strict. So you're probably just going to want to pick something that's very intentional. For example, we have people who come to Singapore simply because they say, I want to get out of my own country. I want to get out of North America. I want to get out of Europe. I just want to go somewhere else. I want to go to the Switzerland of Asia. And some people say, heck no, I'm never going to go to Singapore. I have never been there. I don't know. Is this part of China? Where is this, right? So it's a very, but you want to pick a solid, reputable platform. I think that's the first part. And the second part is when you buy crypto on there, start with the blue chips. Start with Bitcoin. Start with Ethereum. Start with the blue chips, with the big ones. Only then go into the crazy altcoins that your best friend told you to buy because it's going to do another 100x or something, right? Start with the blue chips and leave the majority in the blue chips. That's my second key thing I think that people do wrong. And the third one, only go self-custody once you kind of familiarized yourself with this, once you kind of understand this a bit, and then don't do this with all your funds. Do this step by step, and then you should definitely learn it. I completely am aligned with that. I just always think that the kind of teaching is always, like if you don't control your own keys, you don't own your coins, and better don't even get started. That's kind of the sentiment. I think no, buy the blue chips, get started yesterday, and do this right away. And then along the way, start withdrawing coins and start controlling them yourself. And you're going to get more and more comfortable with that. And it's not something that you're going to do right away. I remember when I bought my first Bitcoins in 2015, actually in 2014, but then I lost so much money because the market crashed. But when I really started buying in 2015, I bought them on Kraken. And I think it took me, I don't know, probably 2 years until I actually took them off the exchange and actually started controlling them with my own private key. Now, of course, I was definitely lucky that I chose Kraken and not some shady exchange. I get it. But I don't know, if you would have told me at the beginning, you can never ever leave your coins on Kraken, you always have to withdraw them, I'd be like, okay, you know what, I'm not even going to get started, because for me to put a meaningful amount of money in there, that it has a meaningful impact, I have no clue what this even means to control my private key. So this took a little bit, and I think that's probably the key thing I would tell for beginners.
Yeah, it definitely took a bit for me to take ownership of my private keys as well. But it's hard, though, too. A lot of people coming in this space, they see exchanges that appear to be reputable. We've had a lot of exchanges that really appear to be reputable in Canada, the U.S., Quadriga, we've had FTX,
Sure.
a lot of things that look so reputable, and they're buying, rights to stadiums for $1 billion, and then bad things still happen. So, but you're right though. A lot of people do not know what that means, and that could very well scare them away rather than getting their feet wet. Because once you're invested in something, that's when people really start learning and paying attention on it.
And I want to put a flip side to this. Look, it's the same thing as when a plane crashes, right? Sure, that's in the big news, and it sucks, and it's not good that 400 people or something die, right? And I get it, and that's kind of the equivalent to one of those large exchanges going down. But honestly, every single day, people lose access to their private keys, or they kind of, mess something up, or they, lose the device or something, and people hardly ever talk about it, especially not those that have the biggest mouth on social media. Because obviously they're the ones who are pushing for this narrative, and so they never want to admit that something went wrong, or they lost access to something, or they lost the device or something, right? So I think this was once researched that even if you remove the Satoshi's coins and say Satoshi actually lost access to his coins, or Satoshi died, or whatever, so let's even remove that. I think in history more access to coins have been lost non-custodial than custodial, and this is still. And I can't remember exactly where this data was. Even if it's not entirely spot on correct, I don't think it's far off. I can actually imagine this because there's so many stories of people losing hundreds of millions of dollars with inheritance issues, with just losing access to it, right? So I don't know. I understand that people then say, oh, but I had my coins on FTX, and I get it. Sucks. And I don't think 2 days before the FTX collapse, many people would have thought, oh, FTX is going to be a shady exchange. I get it. Yeah, there's a flip side to it. And I know so many stories of people who
I would be interested. I would definitely be interested to see those numbers. Actually, not something
I look it up, and if I have it, if I find it quick easily, then I'll just send it to you afterwards. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. We're getting to the end here, Julian. But what's maybe something that in the space that's kind of stood out to you? Maybe biggest news, or maybe the biggest metric as of late. What's worth talking about right now?
On the one hand, positive stuff. On the one hand, negative stuff. I think the negative stuff is that on Crunchbase, we have fewer new crypto startups than we have ever seen before in the last 10 years of crypto. And obviously, to me, that's a very negative and shocking statistic, because at the end, it's always entrepreneurs who need to drive an ecosystem forward. And so there's two reasons for that. Either because there's nothing new to build in the crypto space, which I think would be scary. So, I don't think that would be positive. Or the other thing is, or it's not needed, so it could be, everything is done, so now it's just the existing companies, they're all good. Or there's just very little interest in this from a fundamental standpoint from new businesses, because maybe they are all jumping on the AI shiny object or whatever, right? So, and I think that to me is a bit of a scary kind of situation, for the simple reason that I believe businesses and entrepreneurs are the lifeblood of civilization. Without a business, without entrepreneurs, doesn't matter if you're a large business, small business, self-employed, they drive everything. Every single tax dollar that ever is paid comes from businesses. Being self-employed, being a large business, it doesn't matter. So to me, that's always kind of the pulse of health of an ecosystem. And that scares me a little bit, and it could be an early indicator that maybe we're actually going to see a major downturn and we don't have a spring coming now. So that's probably the negative side to it, right? The positive side is that I actually think the next rally, and we may be in this spring now, so obviously I wanted to start with we're going to have a continued winter here. Let's flip to the counter article here, which is let's do spring, and spring is we're going to focus on a regulatory cycle. And that regulatory cycle, so we had this entire clash with the SEC, we had all around the world, and we had this big fight, and we had this choke point 2.0, and now we are coming out of this, and crypto becomes regulated. There's actual rules to it, and that could be a massive leg up. On the one hand, because of Bitcoin spot ETF, because of real world assets that suddenly come in and start mingling with these new digital assets. And that's where, in my opinion, suddenly blockchain gets a total new feature, which is interoperability. And that's what I think the Bitcoin maxis actually get really well. One of the reasons why they love to have Bitcoin as the backbone of so many payment rails is not so much because I don't know, it's actually decentralized. It's more that these companies can actually have an interoperable payment rail. And that's something, if this suddenly then ties in with other assets, I think that's where you really get a new economy in the digital world. So, and I think that's something that's extremely bullish for me. So it's, and it could be, right, that right now maybe we have a bit of a fight between the let's have another winter or we're going to go into spring. And it could be that this spring is just going to take over and suddenly businesses realize, hey, you know what? There is huge opportunity there. I was wrong to not starting my business 3 months ago. I'm going to start it now. And then suddenly we see this number go up. But to me, I always believe that's a very fundamental thing. So just like we look at on blockchains, right? I mean, one thing that people always monitor on blockchains is how many projects build on that blockchain. What's the TVL on that blockchain? Sure, but that's blockchain. If you look at the entire ecosystem, it's the same kind of concept, right? You want to know how many entrepreneurs believe in that system and how many builders are there. At the end, that's what really drives utility. And so that's the kind of upside downside that I see a bit. And I believe the spring is going to take over. But it's definitely something to watch out for.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe we experience a little bit longer winter than usual. You know, every cycle is a little bit unique, it seems. So, my next question is, Julian, you create a lot of content in this space. You offer so many free educational resources. What are some of the lessons you've learned in podcasting about Bitcoin, crypto, and creating YouTube content?
I think you are the best student by being a teacher. That's probably the thing that stood out to me. There hasn't been topics that I understood so well if I hadn't have to teach or explain them on YouTube in a simple language, understandable format. I remember I have this entire cryptography course. You can just look it up. You look for my name, Julian Hosp Cryptography, and I really go through all of cryptography from the absolute basics all the way to how do ring signatures on Monero work? How does mixing work? How do zero knowledge proof works? And these are things I never learned in school. I've always been good in math. I've always been good in science. But I mean, specific cryptography, which is just math, is something I never learned. And so I had to actually learn this all by myself. And I was just very curious. I was curious in how does this work? And obviously we talk about the elliptic curve and what does it mean if there's a number up my sleeve, something that people always kind of worry about Bitcoin, that the elliptic curve function that Satoshi chose is because it's it's not a very typical function, right? And so why did he chose that specific one? Is there something that has a so-called number up my sleeve? And what are these things? And how would you notice this? And how would you see this? So these are just some very, very interesting things. And look, I would have never had that deep understanding of cryptography, of game theory, of finance, of the economy, had I not been forced to teach that on YouTube. I don't know. But you must be in a similar situation, I would assume.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm learning so much more about people, their companies, because I'm researching beforehand, right? I'm learning about it. There's so many hours that go into it that may not go into anything else. Maybe I'm just doing something, walking the dog, watching a movie, anything else, right? So it's a great hobby for me to push myself deeper into this space. And like you, Bitcoin's really kind of lit a fire up under my ass to learn all these things I never really learned at school. So Here I am learning from people like you, Julian, who are so gracious to give me their time. This space is awesome for that. People are so willing to talk about it and help others learn more about it. Do you have any events coming up?
We are organizing an Ordinals event in September. There's Token 2049 in Singapore. It's a humongous crypto event, Token 2049. And we're doing a side event there, which is called the Ord Summit. There was an Ordinal Summit at Bitcoin Miami, and we're going to do that counter here in Asia. Also, very similar people, similar speakers. So that's going to be end of September. So if anyone is coming to Token 2049, there's the Formula One is here during that time. So there's like a big kind of circus during that entire week. So if you're dropping by, then definitely check out the Ordinal Summit. I can send you the details on that. And that's the main event right now that we're focusing on. Other than that, I mean, sure, would love if you go to big.io, check out our platform, use us to dollar cost average into crypto, get cash flow on your crypto. One key feature that we've always done from the start, and I think that's the reason why we're still around, where everyone else kind of went bankrupt. we always committed on doing everything 100% transparent. So you can track and trace every coin flow on the blockchains. It's very different how BlockFi used to do it or how Celsius did it, who all black box. They never told you how it actually worked. For us, was very different from the start. We always had this transparency model. So certain partners, for example, 3 Hours Capital, were unusable for us because we couldn't use them, because we couldn't show to our customers what actually happened to the funds. And so that's at the end what kept us safe from using some of those partners. And yeah, sometimes it's a blessing in disguise. We had these strict rules about transparency all the time, and we always wanted to show that. We had this concept of proof of reserves very early on. So when people kind of talked about this, we're like, yeah, we've been having this all the time. You can track and trace every single Satoshi coming in or Gwei coming in. So yeah, if you want to go to bake.io, check it out.
Yeah, awesome, man. And definitely one of the first things I look for when I look at a coin, or the creators or the developers or a company, the people behind it, is the first thing I'm going to look at is, who's behind the project? Are their names out there? How transparent are they? So something I certainly highly respect in this space. So thank you for that. Julian, just let us know where we can follow you and learn more.
Follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/Julian Hosp. I'm Julian Hosp on all the channels. So that's the main one. I have an English YouTube channel as well. I have about 10,000 followers on there. So that's the alternative.
Julian Hosp English on YouTube. Awesome, man. Yes. Thanks a lot, Julian.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Hey, you. Thanks for listening to the Halving Report podcast. If you like the show and want to support, subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and be sure to leave us a comment. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram @Halving Report. If you're a Canadian and you want to buy Bitcoin or cryptocurrency for the first time, get a $20 bonus when you go to bitbuy.ca/halving. If you want $30 off the ultimate digital asset security device BitFi, go to halvingreport.com/bitfi for more information. Until next time, I'm Brad Mines.